crazy. It is starting to move forward rapidly, but when you mentioned about the executive support, the other thing that brings to mind is I've kind of had this approach for quite a while that really, when I'm talking to people about this who are potentially looking to solve this problem, I'm looking to, it's not necessarily like a particular sector or a particular region or a particular type of company. It's definitely obviously larger companies, it's not tiny organizations.
Sure. Yeah.
But for me, the thing that stands out is where you get a person or a department or a group of stakeholders who just say, this isn't good enough, we can do it better. Or there's a strong driver where they say, we've got this risk and we've got to sort this out. And we talk about those people as being the enlightened ones when it comes to services procurement. In your experience, has the people in the organizations who've got the momentum, the executive sign-off, the business case, the kind of the motivation and compulsion to really move on this, has it been tied to any particular sectors, locations, type of company, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think I don't think it's any specific industry that has a monopoly on, wanting to start in services at a higher level of sophistication. I think it really just depends on the organization and the dynamics. Obviously in MSPs, managed service providers, the sponsorship, right? The key sponsor has always been either HR, procurement, sometimes both. And those leaders are great, and I know they're trying to move the needle, but I think ultimately, those departments also have their own internal clients, and those end up being the business. So from my perspective, especially most recently, the thing that's been really heartening to see is that outside of the procurement and HR sponsorship, circles, I've seen business owners start understanding the service procurement space more and the value that can join. So, like an example, just last year, I was working with a retail provider here in the Portland area, and the person that identified a need to manage service procurement was not in procurement. She wasn't in HR. She was actually within the IT organization, but
Right.
essentially kind of like a process excellence, almost kind of like a vendor manager. And it was her and having that direct line to the CTO and identifying, hey, there's something here that's not right. Their procurement HR groups are providing great valuable service, but also she was actually the owner of these IT supplier relationships and seeing day to day and her team dealing with the issues of not tying workers to SOWs, issues with payments. When her CTO asked me, hey, this big IT outsourcer, like, where are all their people at? And she's not having an answer. She actually was able to look at, hey, the staff log MSP that exists has all this data. Why can't I get this for this population I actually more directly manage? So through credit for her, she actually helped with making those connections. We worked with her for actually developing a business case. And I think in my experience, that was one of the fastest platforms to get directly to the CTO because of the fact that she was already ingrained within the business. And I say this not to downplay the role of our sponsors and HR and procurement. They obviously are very important, and certainly there's CPOs, CHROs that care about this could also, move the needle as quickly as that. But I think it's a really good example, whether you're provider side or within the sponsorship circles, of just ensuring that you solicit that business owner, right, and getting those advocates. Because especially in the service procurement space, like you really need that, like the actual end business owner to really want and need the solution to make that business case and deployment of the solution much more effective.
Yeah, it's definitely, I agree with you. It's definitely something that, for example, we as a business, as a tech provider in the space, we've learned over time. If you're trying to approach companies to solve problems and, make procurement's life easier and make things, people don't care. Companies, they should care more about procurement, but there's almost like a bigger issue to consider here, which is what about the buyer? What about
Yeah.
the organization? So the organization needs to engage these services so that they can deliver their product or service to the market. It's a
Yes.
decent chunk of how they get their work done, isn't it? So actually, we always say making it easier, safer, faster for the people that need to buy the services to do it and have value in mind, because that is the actual business driver, really, isn't it?
100%. Yeah. And I think with that, a key thing is then actually getting and understanding the business's key pain points, right? And then creating a solution that is specific to their needs. And that can be different from organization to organization. And I bring it up because I know from, MSP space, from our HR procurement sponsors, you mentioned, the idea of classification, first. Like I think we in the, services procurement staffing industry, like we understand like workforce classification, our sponsors do. as well too. But I think it's hard and challenging to then go to an IT business manager or a marketing director and tell you, hey, this way that you've been doing business all the time, it's not correct. And I'm going to force you into either picking deliverable milestone or it needs to be staff augmentation. Obviously, there are some companies that have enough of a sway within the sponsorship organizations to make the type of change happen. But what I found is a lot of times you have to meet the business where they're at, right? So you have to create a custom solution that still drives, a lot of the goals of a MSP program or using a technology to help guide the right buying behaviors and classification. But a lot of times you need to start off with maybe it's a more hybrid solution. Maybe you allow, for example, maybe some T&M based statements of work and making sure it's not misclassified by turn to some other risk mitigation points. Maybe there's like a holdback in the statement of work or something else that the supplier is taking on some risks. So it's not purely just a veiled staff augmentation play. And I only say that because that could be at least oh yeah, yeah, I'll say the word compromise, but something to meet the business where they're at to at least get that into the program. And then once you get in the program, you can use that data to help really make those transformational changes, like maybe truly then mandating anything under statement work has to be deliverable. It'll be a journey, right? But a lot of times you have to get people in first, right, to at least show that this is actually a real thing that can be successful. The same thing for sourcing too. We've had a lot of clients where they love the idea of sourcing. Our procurement sponsors love that idea, but the culture of the business isn't pro sourcing. It's more let the end business owner pick the supplier and go from there. I think there's ways that you can show them kind of these small steps of like doing spot bids or maybe just doing a negotiation at the point of renewing an existing SOW instead of trying to ham fist a mandate on competitive sourcing and then finding the business is running away from that mandate because they feel like they're not being heard or they don't have time and they're not being engaged in a conversation. It's just like, yeah, I understand you're saying that you don't have time, but let me show you what the technology can do to condense the sourcing process instead of months. That'll just take a week, 2 weeks, whatever that situation might be.
Yeah, and it's when you look at most organizations and where they are with services procurement, I would still say the vast majority of organizations are still at a low level of maturity. Clearly, there are some companies that have moved on, and some of the great companies that you've done work with certainly have got to a sophisticated level. But if I think of it in my head as like 10 notches on a volume switch of like, where these companies are, there's 10 notches of value they can add from being at baseline very unsophisticated. They don't necessarily need to be turned all the way up to 10 straight away. They can start hitting 3, 4. They're getting massive value out of it, and they can
Absolutely.
ramp it up as they go and like add in more sophisticated things. So yeah, I think the the interesting thing that for me that you mentioned around that, or the particularly interesting thing, is pain points, and that
Yeah.
is another one. And this is something where sometimes it's a struggle. You certainly from as a tech vendor point of view, when you're talking to these client organizations, sometimes organizations just say, "Show me the shiny," show me a demo, and it's like really we have learned over the years that the most effective way to support customers or even just have that conversation is to understand those pain points because they are going to be there's going to be ultimately feel like the same probably 10, 15 pain points are going to exist kind of for everybody, but the recognition of which pain points are actually important seems to really vary from company to company. Have you experienced that as well?
Yeah, 100%. I'd say, my last role, I'd probably say at least 25% of my time was actually doing what I call just like workshops, right? For that same situation. We initially talked about our service and they want to see the tech demo. And, at that time we were like the service component of the technology component. So for me, it's like, oh, the technology is great, but, there's people that are doing some of the work here. Let me show you what we can do there. So I think to kind of nip that in the bud, we started taking this position of like trying to do workshops first, right? To really tease out what the issues are and then coming back, or at least in that, even you can even do it in that point in the workshop. Because there's a lot of people that we're all impatient now. Like we want to know like what could it look like. So I've then led these workshops where we start using it. First half of it is really to understand what the overall organizational objectives are, right? Then teasing out the pain points from the stakeholders. And to my earlier point, that workshop would be with those key sponsors, but we always, always encourage them to include some of the key business owners as well too, so they can hear it from the business. And it's been interesting that in a lot of those situations, we would hear some debate between the business owners and our
Yeah.
procurement HR sponsors on what the issues actually are, right? So, and that's good. That's a good outcome in that conversation for them to really start hearing each other as much as it is them hearing us, right, as providers. Um, but then in that, once you start teasing out what the pain points are, if you're ready for it and if we prep well, you could actually then, okay, great. Now that I hear that XYZ are the actual major issues for you, let me now focus your point in the demo on these functionalities versus it being this very generic demo, right? And same thing for on the service side. Great. Like let me show, in addition to technology, this is what the people component of this could do on your behalf, right? To really provide a really great solution. So I think whenever possible, like having that dialogue, I know that it takes a lot of time, right, from prospective buyers, but I think it's certainly worth that time. And I think it's really is more engaging, solution-based conversation versus it being this transactional pitch that probably isn't going to really hit, right? Or on both sides, it doesn't hit for us, but it also it doesn't really help the buyer think through and really kind of deep dive into like what their core issues are to help them with their business case for what they're trying to do.